Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we will begin talking about the King's Indian attack against the French defense. I will explain how to reach this position, and then we're going to talk about the main moves here, which are knight to f6, g6, and bishop to d6. G6 and bishop to d6 we will cover in separate videos. Today we're going to focus on knight to f6. From here, there's three main ideas that the black player can have. They can go ahead and castle queenside. Another idea is to go for a b6 and bishop to b7, which is not very aggressive, or they can go for the aggressive option, which is to castle kingside and go for a b5, a5, expanding on the queen side. We will take a look at three games so you know how to deal with each setup and how to attack in those situations. All right, let's get started. The opening moves are as follows. We play pawn to e4, e6, and we reach the French defense. Now, it is important in this position that we play d3. And I'm going to explain to you why in a second. Remember, this is an openings-based setup, so we could have gone for knight to f3, we could have played g3, but against the French defense, it is essential that we play this move d3. The reason for that is that after they play d5, which is the common break the black player usually plays in the French defense, attacking our pawn e4 right away, we'll be able to play knight to d2. The reason for this knight to d2 being such a clever move is that if they want to take on e4 now, we can take with the pawn, and there's not going to be this queen trade happening along the d file. Let's take a move back just so that you understand the difference here. If in this position we play any other move, let's say knight to f3, well, they can take on e4 and then trade queens. I'm not saying this is a bad position, but when we play the King's Indian attack, we want to attack. It's in the name of the opening. If we trade queens, our attack is going to be slowed down. It's not going to be the same position. So after knight to d2, here black normally plays the move c5. Since we didn't put a pawn on d4 ourselves, black just takes advantage and they put another pawn that is controlling another central square. Another useful thing of this move is the vacating square on c7 that a queen can occupy later. After c5, we continue here with knight g to f3. We continue our developmental plan, which is to put the pieces in the same King's Indian attack setup. Here, black continues with knight to c6. This move just aims to develop a minor piece. And here we play g3. We're getting ready to fianchetto our bishop to g2 and castle kingside. It is in this position that black is going to have the options to play either knight to f6, g6, or bishop to d6. In this video, we will cover knight to f6 and the ideas that follow after. Before we jump into the games, I want to go over the attacking ideas. As I mentioned in the introduction to the King's Indian attack, and I will leave the link in the description below, we play this opening so we don't have to memorize opening theory. We just memorize this setup here, and from here we understand. Keyword, understand, not memorize the attacking patterns. Okay, so the first idea I want to discuss is that we want to advance our pawn to e5, attacking the knight and at the same time pushing this knight back. This knight usually comes to d7, attacking our pawn here, but notice something. Our pawn that's on e5 is controlling some very key squares, controlling d6 and controlling f6. And as you will see in some of the games, controlling this f6 square is very important. The next idea is behind pushing our h-pawn down the board. So what we're going to do, once our pawn is already on e5 and is well supported by a rook, we're going to play h4, h5, h6, and what this is going to do is that it's going to force black to have to play this move g6, and this is going to weaken the dark squares around the black king, and we will be able to use those black squares to penetrate and create mating threats, especially with our queen, putting a queen on g7, for example, as you will see in some of the games that I'm about to show you. One of my favorite setups comes behind placing the when black places queen to c7. When this queen comes to c7, the way we're going to punish this move is to play bishop to f4. This move serves two purposes. It protects our pawn on e5, but also there is this x-ray attacking the queen. And right now, this doesn't seem possible to attack the queen with our bishop, but continue watching. As you will see in a couple of games, this idea will become very clear. Another important concept is the idea of putting a piece on the square on g5. You can put either a bishop there or the knight there. I personally prefer to put my knight on g5. This is going to force black to do two things. Either you capture my knight right away, in which case we will take with the pawn and then we're going to bring our queen to h5. Or what usually happens is that they don't do anything here. For example, they make another logical move like a4 and then we bring our queen to h5. We threaten checkmate on h7, so now they're forced to either put this pawn on h6, bringing our knight back, or they capture our knight on g5. What we want out of this is for them to push this pawn to h6, and then we have a decision to make. Either we move our knight or we leave it there and we bring another piece into the attack, either knight to e3 or knight to h2, which is going to come to g4, and from there it is going to sacrifice itself on f6. And as you will see with the open h file already as well, we will be able to bring our king in some situations to g2 and also bring the rook to h1. All right, now with all these ideas in mind, let's jump into the games. In this game 1, we will see what to do if black decides to castle queenside. So after knight to f6, we go bishop to g2, and after bishop to e7, here we castle and we have our King's Indian attack setup. And black plays b6. So now that we have this position, the next thing we need to figure out is what to do with our c1 bishop. Well, that is easy. The way we're going to bring this bishop out is by moving this rook to e1. A very useful move in these situations. Not only does it support the advancement of the e5 pawn, but also vacates the f1 square for this knight to go there. And now that the knight is no longer here on d2, then our bishop will be able to get out. So we're going to play rook to e1, bishop to b7. Black has not committed to castling yet, and both kingside and queenside are still available. So we should not disclose any of our ideas yet. So here, in these situations, we play this move c3. A very flexible move, waiting to see what black decides to do. Queen c7, and again a3. The same idea. We're preparing to launch an attack with b4 in case that black decides to castle queenside and open up the position right away. Black castles queenside, and now we play queen to e2. The idea of queen to e2 is, before we play b4, is to get away from this x-ray down the d file. In some situations, d takes e4 followed by d takes e4, and some weird knight takes on e4 maneuvers could happen. So we get away from this x-ray, we move our queen out the way, and then we're ready to push on b4 and open up the queen side. So we go queen e2 and h6 by black here. The same idea for black. We want to open on the queen side, and black wants to open here on the king side with moves like g5, g4, and h5, h4, opening up our king. We play b4. We're making contact first, and black continue with c4. The alternatives were to go for g5, but after b takes on c5, bishop takes on c5, knight to b3, attacking the bishop, bishop e7, e takes d5, knight takes d5, we go bishop to b2, we're ready to go c4, attacking the rook on h8, also the knight. So here, g4, attacking our knight, we go knight d4, knight h5, c4 now, knight to f6, knight to b5, attacking the black queen, queen to d7 and d4, and this position is just so much better for white. We're ready to blast this position completely open with moves like d5, pawn takes, this rook is coming to c1, this bishop is going to be hitting that rook. It is not pleasant to play this with black. So instead, c4 in the game was played, and d takes on c4, preparing a super imaginative queen sacrifice. The pawn takes on e4, knight takes and queen takes, and after knight to b4, it looks like white lost a very useful pawn, but here comes the queen sacrifice with queen takes on b7 check. The queen capture on b7 and a takes on b4. Just 2 pieces for the queen, but the g2 bishop is going to be a monster, and this rook on a1 is also going to have a lot of attacking ideas later on in this game. Bishop to f6, knight to d4, we're getting ready to come to either b5 and c6, and don't forget, this knight cannot be captured because look who has entered the game. Our very nice bishop from g2 is attacking the queen on b7, so the queen comes to c7, and here bishop to f4, again hitting the queen on c7. All of white pieces, all of them are in the attack, while black is just sitting around with his queen for 2 pieces, not being able to do anything. Here black goes for e5, thinking, okay, I'm going to take one of your 2 pieces now, thank you so much. But white continues with knight to c6. Black took on f4, and knight takes on a7. And unfortunately, in this position, the black queen had to take on a7. If you had gone for king to b8, well, we go knight b5, and this nasty threat of rook to a8 checkmate would have forced you to either way play queen to b7, and we would have taken that queen off the board. Another variation here was to go for king to d7, and here we go bishop h3 check, king d6, rook a to d1 check, and after bishop d4, rook takes on d4 will be checkmate. So unfortunately, after knight takes on a7, queen takes on a7 had to be played. The rook captured, f takes on g3, h takes on g3, and after rook h to e8, we gave a check on a1, and black resigned in view of king to d7, bishop h3, and after the king moves, we're going to win that rook on e8. So game over. The idea for this game is to consider playing c3 and a3 if your opponent has yet decided where he wants to castle. Now let's move on to game number 2. In game number 2, we will see what happens when black castles kingside and plays an early b6. The game continues bishop g2, bishop e7, castles, and rook e1. As mentioned, the rook comes here and prepares this e5, knight to f1 maneuver in order to get this bishop out. b6, as we will see in the next example, b5 instead of b6 is a much better move. Here we continue with e5, knight to d7, and knight to f1. Now the bishop is ready to come out. Black continues with bishop to b7 and h4 by white. Against kingside castling, there are a few ways to attack the king. Pushing the h pawn down the board to h6, and after moves like g6, we're going to weaken the dark squares around the black king. Another key idea is to put a piece on g5, either a bishop or a knight, in conjunction with a queen coming to h5, which will provoke this move h6, and then we're going to have a hook here on h6 in which to continue our attack. Another useful idea is also to go knight to e3 or knight to h2, preparing to go knight to g4. From g4, we can use now the square on f6 and h6 to sacrifice our pieces and open up the king side. And finally, as we will see in this game, when the queen comes to c7, we're going to play bishop to f4. Check out the introduction to the King's Indian attack in the description if you want to see another great example on how to attack once the bishop lands on f4. In this position, black played b5, a very sad move considering you could have played it in one go a few moves ago. Here, knight that was on f1 comes to h2. Remember, this knight in some situations wants to come to g4, and here d4 by black. It seems logical to want to play this move because it does open the diagonal for your bishop to be active, but this is a very horrible move. Now white is going to be able to get this e4 square for his knight in the future, which is going to serve as a launching pad in order to sacrifice material either here on f6 or h6. In this position, white continue with knight to g5. As we mentioned, we want to put a piece there in conjunction with queen to h5 and allow this h6 to come in and open up the king side. Black continue with h6. Notice that if they had gone for bishop takes on g5, we take on g5 with the pawn, and this is going to follow with queen to h5, knight to g4, bishop to e4, and we're going to have a tremendous attack on the black king. Instead, in the game, we have h6 on the board, and it doesn't matter. Queen to h5 came anyway, sacrificing the knight on g5. H takes on g5, the rook went to b8, knight to g4, and here we're going to have knight to f6 in the air is coming. Also bishop to e4, king to g2, rook to h1 ideas. This black king is going to get checkmated. Black played knight to f8. The knight came to f6 anyway with check. E has to go. Bishop took on f6. E takes on f6. Now this bishop joins the party. We're attacking the queen. So e5 is played and bishop to d5 on the board. In the game, rook came to e8, but a very nice sequence. If you take on f4, we go rook e7, and after knight takes, we take on f7 with checkmate. So after rook to e8, as in the game, we go g6. We're taking advantage of the fact that this bishop is pinning the king here. So if knight takes, we just take with the queen, winning back our material, and we're still going to have the attack. So knight to d8 came, protecting the f7 square. But after g takes on f7, the black player resigned here in view of knight takes on f7, queen to g5. Again, this knight is pinned. We're ready to take on g7 with checkmate. So g6, we go queen h6. Again, this knight cannot take our queen. knight to e6 getting in the way, bishop takes, rook takes, and queen to g7. The main ideas when black castles kingside is to launch your pawn down the h file, create some dark square weaknesses. Another one is to put a piece on g5, mainly a knight in conjunction with queen to h5, which will force black to have to play pawn to h6, which will create a hook for you to attack later. Another interesting idea is, remember, if the queen goes to c7, you put a bishop on f4, and in some situations there's going to be a very nice x-ray as you saw in this game, and also check out the introduction to the King's Indian attack if you want to see another example. And another main idea is to go and put a knight on g4 either via d3 or h2, which will attack the f6 and h6 squares. Now let's move on to game number 3. In game number 3, we're going to see what happens when black castles kingside and plays the more aggressive b5, a5 expansion on the queen side. In this game, we're going to start from the beginning just so that you see that you can reach the same position via different move order. We have knight to f3, d5, g3, c5, bishop g2, knight c6, castles, knight to f6, d3, e6, knight b to d2, bishop to e7, e4, and we have our desired setup. Here, black castles, we play rook e1, queen to c7, we play pawn to e5, knight to d7, and now our pawn is being hit with 3 pieces, so the only way to protect it is to go queen to e2. Here, black plays b5, the most aggressive move, and the idea is to go a5, a4, a3, and weaken our dark squares here on the queen side. We continue with knight to f1, a5. The attack on the queen side appears dangerous, but keep something in mind. If we succeed in our attack, we checkmate the black king. While if black succeeds in their attack, they might win a pawn, maybe 2 pawns. So I like my odds. I'm checkmating your king, you're winning a pawn. Bishop to f4. Remember, this idea is very common once this queen is on c7. We want to keep this x-ray, and at the same time, we protect this pawn, so now our queen no longer needs to stay there protecting it. Black continues with a4. Another key idea here is to go for knight to d4. In which case now our queen is being hit, so after we take, pawn takes, black can use the half open c file to attack our pawn on c2. But in these situations we don't panic, we continue our attack, we play h4, knight to g2, knight to g4, and we continue as if nothing happened. And if he ever attacks on c2, we simply place a rook on c1 and the attack is done. So back into the game after a4, we play a3. We don't want black to actually play a3 themselves because then that will weaken our dark squares. Black continues with b4, and here we go. h4, b takes a3, b takes a3, and bishop to a6. Black's position almost looks normal, but like I said, even if they get there, the best they can hope for is to win a pawn. We have bigger fish to fry, and that is checkmating the black king. We continue with h5. We want to go h6, provoking this g6 and creating the dark square weaknesses around the black king. Rook f2 b8, taking control of the only open file in the game right now, h6, g6, and knight to e3. This move has 2 main threats. Knight to g4, which can come to f6 in some situations, and the more deadly threat, which is to go knight takes on d5, in which case e takes on d5 and we'll be able to push e6 with the threat on the queen, the threat on the rook, also threatening with the pawn to take on d7 to take on f7. In this game, black went knight to d4, a huge mistake, because now knight takes d4, pawn takes d4, and knight takes on d5. And now black is absolutely lost. In the game, they play queen to c5, but other alternatives don't work either. If we examine e takes on d5, we play pawn to e6, the bishop comes to d6 to prevent our bishop from taking the queen. Here e takes on f7 and king to h8. A beautiful idea, if they don't play king to h8 and they go for king to f8 instead, is to go queen to e6. Threatening now to take on d6 with both the queen and the bishop, and if bishop captures on f4, we go queen to f7 checkmate. So after king to h8, we go queen to e8 check. They cannot capture with the rooks because it leads to checkmate. They go knight to f8, and after this we go bishop to g5, and black doesn't have a good response to bishop f6 checkmate. So they would have to resign. Coming back into the game, after queen to c5, knight takes on e7 check, queen takes on e7, and we already won a pawn. So at this moment, we're also going to win an exchange with bishop takes on a8, rook takes on a8, queen to e4, attacking the rook, attacking the pawn on d4, and after rook to d8, we take the pawn, and here black resign. As seen in this game, even if black gets to us first and is able to get everything they want in the position, we're still doing well and able to get our attack going as well. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. In the next one, we will cover what to do against g6 and bishop to d6. As always, stay safe, have a great day, show respect to your opponent. See you on the next video.